don't know why. Anytime I open a Twitch stream now, my volume isn't muted. It's literally at like 2%.
Hmm.
Like it's like just barely not muted.
No idea.
Oh, did I hear? Okay, testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Yeah, we're good on Twitch. YouTube is muted. Oh wow, I actually missed it. Okay. Running it back. Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Yeah, we're good. That was weird.
Okay. You ready to get started?
Yep.
Hello and welcome to episode 210 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about the first major of the 2026 Call of Duty League season. Major 1 is finally here. It begins on Thursday, January 29th in Texas, hosted by Optic Texas. Yeah, it's been a long time coming. Obviously, the CDL season started back in early December. We had 2 weeks of online qualifiers and then a 4 to 5 week break. And then we've had 3 weeks of qualifiers since then. Some of the most unpredictable results I can imagine in really recent CDL history. So we're going to break it all down and give our predictions for some of these matches and give our predictions to who we think will actually win Major 1. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Back-to-back days with a little Ego Child podcast. Feels good. Got some good stuff to talk about. We've been hyping up this episode for a while, so looking forward to it. Hope you guys are as well and ready to jump right in.
Yeah, so this is the preview show, and it's obviously the first one of the season. And how we do things is we run through the winners bracket round 1 matches, obviously the only matches that we know will definitively happen. Typically we pick chalk in a lot of these brackets, and then things go haywire immediately right out of the gate, and then we pick the rest of the matches privately. We just text back and forth about who we think is actually going to win. But I think this is probably, like I said at the top, one of the most unpredictable majors that I can remember. You have a lot of teams that have looked good but not great. You also have some teams that have looked not so good but not horrible. Like an Optic has looked very good, even great at some points, and then not very good, even very poor in some matches as well. And then we've had some teams on the opposite side as well. I think we should start at the very top of the bracket, if you don't mind, because this is a match that we just saw this past week. This was before when we did our predictions about this match, we talked about it, and I said that this was one of the most intriguing and interesting matches of the week, of all of the qualifiers, because it would kind of give us an idea about where these two teams are in relation to each other and within the CDL standings as a whole. What ended up happening was Paris beat Toronto Koi, and then Toronto the very next day ended up losing a match in a sweep that we didn't think that they should, and then they fall to the 8th seed, nearly fall entirely out of the winners bracket. So definitely a lot of momentum on the side of Paris in this matchup, even though they have themselves not looked particularly great in comparison to what they did in the preseason and in the first few weeks of the regular season. What do you think about this matchup between Paris and Toronto in winners bracket round 1 here?
Yeah, I mean, you did a good job setting it up there. I think where my head is at, especially coming off of just seeing this game a couple days ago, and it was a game that for our predictions, I went with Toronto heading into it. Now this time around, I gotta go with Gentlemates just because, not even really as a difference because of the outcome of this particular matchup, but it's really that second match for Toronto of this past weekend that has me more concerned. I don't know how much to buy into G2's recent victories over FaZe and Toronto versus what the losses mean for Toronto, if that makes sense. I don't think I said that properly, but uh, essentially, I think I was thinking Toronto versus Gentlemates would be a very close matchup going into last weekend. It was, and it still very much could be in this first round, but the fact that Toronto lost to Gentlemates and then followed it up with another loss just has me a little bit more concerned about Toronto heading into the major, especially in the sense, like you said, and I said it last episode, just I wasn't even contemplating the notion of Toronto not being in winners bracket before a couple days ago. Like that wasn't even a thought that crossed my mind as a possibility, let alone it almost becoming reality if not for, a couple results going Toronto's way in the days to follow those two losses. So I still believe in this Toronto team. I don't, especially long term for the rest of the season, I still think this can be a really strong team. I still think there's a chance they can win this game, especially what I said heading into the last episode was, or the last time these guys squared off, I said, Joe DeCeve's got to put the team on his back and have an all-star caliber performance, and he did in a loss. So if he is able to replicate that and just somebody else steps up alongside him, that could tip the scales a little bit in Toronto's favor, especially in a series where we saw Gentlemates win two S&Ds, and in the map for a hard point, Toronto jumped out to a very strong lead. I know we just talked about this for people who uh, have listened to both episodes, but if Toronto are able to just steady the ship after that strong lead, even like trading Hills 30 and 30 points, splitting them perfectly evenly, they win that map 4 and they win the series 3-1. So it's possible that that is Toronto's path to pulling off a quote unquote upset here. I mean, it is a 1 versus 8 matchup. We did see the 8 seed pulling off multiple upsets, at least two that I remember, just last season. And it's possible that could be the way Toronto gets this done through the respawns. But talked about it last episode as well with Gentlemates. We saw twice this past week where Gentlemates got down very large early in hard points and were able to make the comeback consecutively. So that, I still think highly of Gentlemates, and I think, despite the S&D success in this series, I think when you have like the slaying power of Ghosty and Neptune, I think that this Gentlemates team should be a good respawn team long term, but also Sib with Sniper, Envoy known for his strong play in S&D and in previous years and coming up from the S&D scene, even if he was a keyboarder and all that nonsense at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that it's a good mix, and that could be the thing with Gentlemates. Maybe it's on one day they're looking strong in the respawns, and another day they're able to win the series through the search. And I mean that's a sign of a well-rounded team. Um, but it's also, I mean, it's a sign of a well-rounded team potentially. And like if they put that together where they're having their strong respawn and strong S&D on the same day, makes them a pretty hard team to beat. So I'm going with Gentlemates in this matchup. I just think uh, the other outcome from Toronto has me a little bit more concerned about them than I previously was, but I'm still expecting this to be an absolute banger. First matchup, I think if it goes game 5, just based on the recent success Gentlemates had against Toronto and S&D, it should be a Gentlemates 3-2 win. I could see a world where Gentlemates wins earlier than a 3-2, but I do think if Toronto is able to take the respawns, then that is a little bit more of a it could.
What happened there? Is it me?
Was that me or you?
I don't know.
You left the Discord call.
Oh, well, it just like froze for me, and then all right. If you just want to pick up where you left off, it was like I forget what.
I was wrapping up. I was
Okay.
just saying. I'll cut for a second. I think Gentlemates, just due to the recent success in Search and Destroy against Toronto, that could be their path to victory here again with another 3-2 win. If Toronto is able to steal the respawns and keep it from going to a game 5, that could potentially be Toronto's path to victory in this first round matchup. But I'll take Gentlemates here.
Yeah, I definitely go with Paris as well. If you look, a lot of these two teams have played a lot of the same opponents as well. They both played Miami. I think it might be notable that Paris won 3-1 against the Heretics. Toronto won 3-2. Granted, at very different points. Toronto Miami played back on December 6th, and Paris and Miami just played 2 days ago on the 25th of January. So a lot of time passed between then, and obviously Paris, I feel, was at like a different point in their run, I guess, or their dominance. But you also look at FaZe Vegas, both played Paris and Toronto. FaZe won both of those series 3-2. Interestingly, both Paris and Toronto won 3-0 against LAT. So, there are a lot of similarities, but we just saw this series, obviously, this past weekend. Toronto has looked really off other than that LAT series. I think I said they lost the last, I want to say 3 of their last 4. If I'm not mistaken, they lost to FaZe. Then they beat LAT after the break, then lost to Carolina, lost to Paris, lost to Minnesota. So certainly there is absolutely no momentum on the side of Koi at the moment. Um, that being said, I think they could definitely make a run in this tournament, whether it be through the winners bracket or the losers bracket. But I can't pick them in good conscience against Paris, who I still believe is like a top 3 team at minimum. And I've been a lot lower on Toronto, even last season and the preseason this year and during the season. Definitely haven't been nearly as high on them as Paris, and not even as high as or on them as you have been with Toronto. So I definitely am going to go with Paris here. I think most people will likely go with the Gentlemates as well. But if Paris were to lose this series, that just changes everything because this is a team I think most people expect them to be in the championship Sunday, like regardless of what happens. But if they lose this, obviously they'd have a huge run to make through the losers bracket to get to that point. And we just saw this series, and like you said, Toronto could have won this match. Like they could have very easily won it 3-1. And we've seen that with Paris a few times, like C9 being a great example. C9 should have won that series, and C9 finished this split or these qualifiers 1-6. They only beat Vancouver, but they nearly swept Paris, and I think that shows kind of the vulnerability of the Gentlemates at this point. They have not looked great. I just can't pick Toronto over them because they have also not looked great, and I think that it will be a running theme of the show is that pretty much everybody in the league, to a certain extent, has not looked at their best over the last few weeks, save for maybe 2 teams in the league, which is pretty incredible that those 2 teams are the teams that we're talking about. So I will go with Paris as well. Real quick, I think there's like can you like unplug your mic? I hear like a click. Talk.
Hello?
Yeah, it sounds good now. I think it might have been like whatever, like unplugged a little bit or something like that. I was hearing almost like a static. I wasn't sure if it
Oh,
was on my end or whatever.
was it coming through the stream?
I don't know. I could only hear it.
Oh,
So,
okay.
uh, um,
Um, decent segue though, with you mentioning, Gentlemates trying to make a run to winners bracket finals. This upcoming match below them, we've seen Gentlemates play against LAT, and it's a question there of what version of LAT would show up if we get a rematch there. But the wild card is Carolina, and we've been hyping them up, rightfully so, over the last couple weeks. 5-0 since bringing Exceed into the fold, and I think this matchup, Carolina versus LAT, another match we just saw. I honestly, that has pretty big implications in terms of what I expect from Gentlemates like throughout the rest of the tournament, because if it's Gentlemates versus LAT, unless LAT come out and slam Carolina, I'm probably leaning Gentlemates in that matchup just because they have beat them already. Carolina versus Gentlemates, though, I don't know who I would pick. Like right now, I'd have to see the matchup first, but jumping the gun a little bit, but I think that's just an interesting way of looking at that top half of the bracket as a whole. But Carolina versus LAT is definitely one of the. I mean, all of these matchups are super interesting in their own separate way, but can't wait for this one.
yeah, we just saw it on Sunday, so there's 4 days separating these matches. They went to about as far as you could go. Game 5, round 11. Carolina ends up winning this series, staving off a reverse sweep attempt by LAT, and they've been on the polar opposites essentially of the last four or 5 weeks in terms of how good they have been. LAT at points, even pre-break, I should say, their last match against Paris was a disaster and basically allowed this kind of Kenny getting benched or getting dropped narrative to kind of fester because they didn't have any matches for 5 weeks. And I think people just saw that result and saw how bad Kenny played in that match and thought, okay, they're definitely going to have to make a roster change. And that just continued into the post break portion. Then they come out, they play Toronto, and they get smacked again by another one of the top 5 teams in the league. They do kind of bounce back toward the end, for sure. They beat Optic to end the fourth week of matches 3-1. And then they beat Boston in game 5 this past week. And then the following day, they lose to Carolina in game 5. So they've been, if you want to look at it, they've been 2-1 in their last 3. They beat Optic. They went to game 5, round 11 with Carolina, who's certainly the hottest team in the league at this point. That being said, they have not looked like the LAT that everybody probably imagined that they would be coming into the season, coming off of a number 1 seed going into champs last year, won a major, scrap one MVP. They looked like a true championship contender from start to finish. And this season, it has been a lot different. They are definitely a tier below what the top tier probably is, and that's probably FaZe and Paris, maybe Carolina and Falcons. I'm not entirely sure how you want to put that, but they don't look like a definitive tier 1 championship contender at this point. And I think that's really disappointing for a lot of LAT fans probably, and Nade Shot, I would assume. Although I thought we would certainly get a tweet by Nade
Yeah.
Shot after the smiles after game 5, but it didn't happen. Maybe he's had some social media training over the past few years, but regardless, LAT is in a very weird position narratively coming into this match and coming into this major because the Kenny thing is still there. It's still lingering. It's not nearly as loud as it was a few weeks ago before the Optic win, but if they get, that they lose here in the first round to Carolina, I think it's just going to continue to grow in noise. The vocal minority, I think you probably should say, like, I don't know if everybody's necessarily calling for him to be benched, but it's certainly growing in size and growing in sound. And I certainly think that this could be the beginning of the end, or I guess the end for LAT if they lose this series, because then that just, like I said, just said with Paris a moment ago, if they go in the losers bracket, no matter whether we think that they'll be able to win a match or two or a few in the losers bracket, it's just a long, hard road to get to where they expect to be for every tournament, and that is to get to Championship Sunday and have a chance to compete for a title. That's you have to win like 6 or 7 matches or whatever to get to that point and to actually be in that position. So if they lose this, I think it's going to be a huge blow for this team. I will go with Carolina. I just I don't think that this is. It's a lot easier to pick Paris over Toronto, I would say, because Toronto has looked worse than LAT recently. Paris, beat them a little more convincingly, I guess, than Carolina won. And also, I don't really believe in the onliner stuff. I really just I haven't for like really my entire life in competitive Call of Duty, but this is such a weird roster to have success in Carolina that there is a part of me that is still skeptical of what could happen at this major, not because of the online stuff, just because I didn't believe that Exceed could have this kind of impact, and I think I'm still not there yet in believing in Exceed and what he could do to unlock these players yet. But I will go Carolina. It's just it's very hard for me to make a decision one way or the other here. Who do you have in this series between LAT and Carolina?
Yeah, I'm going with LAT, and ironically, one of the reasons is I'm thinking, this is first time on LAN in the CDL at least uh for Craze and Lurks.
Mm-hmm.
I guess if you count EWC for Craze, but I don't know how to technically phrase it. It's the first CDL major for Craze. That's
Yeah.
absolutely a fact. So I'll go with that. Um, and I know what I can expect from the LAT guys on LAN, even if Kenny. I think Kenny's played better of late. Even if he comes out and is the Kenny that's really struggled statistically, I still know that he can show up in those big moments on LAN when the crowd's roaring and all that stuff. Um, but even throwing that out the window, LAN versus online, yada yada, there's something in me about like I it might be super weird, but the feeling that I got from LAT like essentially laughing at the end of this past match, I think in other scenarios I would have looked at that as like what the hell is going on here, but because of how close that match is to this one, I just have this feeling in me that it's like it's fuel to the fire more than it is like the super bad look that some people are perceiving it to be. And don't get me wrong, I can definitely understand that and have that debate, and I agree to some extent, but I think honestly if like Scrap was punching his desk or punching his monitor or something in anger, I would have, for whatever reason, been less likely to pick LAT here than I otherwise would have, just because I'm feeling it from like a narrative perspective. Losing my voice. From a narrative perspective, I'm like seeing the memes and the content and everything of like, you know, LAT laughing as they lost to Carolina, and then 4 days later they come out on LAN and absolutely slam Carolina, and then Scraps standing up, yelling across the stage like these guys are frauds, probably saying some other choice words, stuff like that. Like I'm fully bought into the out of game aspect of it, and what a result of LAT beating Carolina would mean in that extent. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna go with LAT here. I do think I like you were saying with Exceed and stuff. I wasn't a believer when they first made the move, and I I've been trying to come up with reasons essentially to pick against Carolina at different points, even though I did pick them to beat Optic just this last week. But in a lot of other matches, I've been like, oh, this could happen, or yada yada yada, and they proved me wrong at every turn. 5-0 with Exceed so far, can't be ignored. And like I was teasing it up at the start of this segment here, I think if Carolina win this matchup against LAT, we are in serious position to be talking about, potentially Carolina's best placing ever at a major. I'd actually have to go and look at that because I don't think they ever made a championship Sunday. So like if they beat LAT and beat Paris and get top 3, I feel like that is like very much their best placing ever automatically.
Yeah, I mean, definitely since London, like London
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
finished in the top 4 and stuff, but I don't think Carolina has. I mean, they put out a lot of, I would say, pretty subpar rosters over the years.
So they came in fourth at Major One last year when they were hot with Gwen, TJ Slasher, and Vivid. I
Okay.
think that's got to be their best placing.
Almost
A
certainly, because
lot
they've
of
only had like 3
yeah,
seasons, and
yeah,
they.
yeah,
I think we would have remembered if Clay had made a run with Carolina. So,
yeah.
yeah. So I mean that I totally agree that you can find a lot of reasons to pick LAT in this series. Like, I think this is a really close match on paper. In the server it was close online, and I can see a world where LAT comes out and they're just much better than Carolina. And I've said it in the past before, but I typically lean on the talent of the roster versus the results sometimes, because especially when a good to great team, at least in my mind, is struggling, I still am like, I have belief because they have so many great players that they're going to be able to beat a team that doesn't have as many great players or as great of players. And I think that you can make an argument for LAT here. They certainly have the more talented roster. I don't think that's in any kind of debate. But there's something with this LAT team that I cannot fully get on board with. I think part of it is Kenny, part of it is Abizi, because people have talked about it, and I think, even Ben has suggested maybe dropping Abizi if you're going to drop Kenny as well, which would be kind of crazy. And
Insane.
like, I don't know who you plan to replace these two players with, but at the same point, like, this is not a perfect fit for, like, this roster is not a perfect fit with each other. Whereas like last year, I thought that they were kind of like a perfect fit. And maybe it's just me kind of holding on to that and thinking like that was a team that let it slip away at the end and they made changes that I personally didn't agree with. So maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's just my personal opinion getting in the way. But I can also see a world, just as I can see, LAT coming out and, rolling Carolina and people kind of pulling back like this is why they were laughing, 4 days ago. I can also see a world where Carolina wins this match and then Carolina's Twitter blows up with, showing LAT laughing and then the scoreboard of this match. And
Yeah.
because LAT, I think part of it is Scrap has this kind of outsized personality and he's so outspoken, he's so cocky, and for good reason, but also sometimes that comes back to bite him, right? Like he got 5-0'd in the grand finals of champs one year and he was talking a lot of stuff before that grand finals. And obviously like you have to dare to be great in some ways. And part of the reason that people are fans of him is because he's not afraid to speak his mind. But again, that backfires sometimes and it doesn't work out. And that confidence that he shows and his teams show don't always align with the results of the matches. So, and I always have a bad feeling about any team that says, well, it happened online doesn't mean that'll happen on land. It's like, all right, like I think if you look at the correlation between the two, I think it's a lot stronger than people would like to realize than, or admit to themselves. So we'll get to see if Carolina are onliners or whatever, then we're going to find out very quickly in this week.
Well, just one more thing on that front for me. I think I mentioned it last episode, or yeah, it would have been yesterday, but just for continuity's sake, I really think that another element to the laughing thing for LAT was that it felt like from the outside looking in, there had to be some, ping slash connection issues or stuff going on during this match. And I think the biggest thing was those maps 3 and 4 where Craze struggled mightily. That's like just the biggest indicator to me. And I'm not gonna solely put it on Craze, but we saw what happened in those maps 3 and 4 when Craze was not performing well, and that is something like if again I don't want to put it solely on him, but if anyone on Carolina comes out super flat and really struggles in this first match on land, we've seen what LAT can clearly take advantage of that and punish a team if everyone's not firing on all cylinders. So that plus the inexperience on land or just the more experience on land for LAT is something that I think could be a factor here. But like you said, could be Fugaze at the end of the day. I do think just like with Gentlemate's Toronto, another match we just saw recently, another match that went to game 5, and if it goes to game 5 again, I would not be mad at all.
Yeah, and I would say on that point that you made, with Craze, the benefit that great teams have, or like supremely talented teams have, is when you have that much talent, if someone underperforms, you have those great players to kind of overperform or
Yep.
mask some of the underperformance. And that's what makes it so difficult for a team like Carolina in this case, where they might have some really talented players, but they're simply not as talented as LAT's current roster. So if somebody underperforms, it's a lot harder for them to pull off these maps. And to their credit, they've been able to deal with that. Like, there have been underperformances, I'm sure, from map to map over these last 5 matches, and they've been able to win those. But it is about a consistency thing, and LAT obviously has 2 former MVPs, or yeah, two. Yeah, BZ's never won an MVP, but like all
Chance
four of
MVP.
like all four like first ballot Hall of Fame kind of players, like that really helps if someone does have an off map.
And I will throw it out there too, just because we haven't explicitly talked about him individually on this show. Nero's got to be the X factor here because we see what he does when he's going. Like we joked about Super Saiyan Real for a while there. If we get Super Saiyan Nero in this series again, like we've seen what Carolina can do. At the same time, we've talked about Nero and consistency issues over the recent years. If Nero comes out and has a super flat series, I don't see any world where like that's what I Nero is the one who can't have an off series here if Carolina want to win. If he comes out and struggles a little bit, I wouldn't be surprised if LAT 3-0 DoorDash him. But it is what it is.
The consistency thing kind of goes into this next series as well. Falcons versus Optic. Optic, we've mentioned this multiple times now. They were the last remaining undefeated team to start the season. I believe they started 3-0. They obviously 2-time defending world champions, and just undoubtedly the best team in the world coming in. We both said that like they're number one with a bullet, basically, with Paris being like right behind them to start the season and even a little bit into the season. And a lot of that has changed over the past 3 weeks. Optic has looked really kind of atrocious since the break, at least compared to what we know they are capable of. They are, I believe they've only won 1 match since the break. They beat Vancouver, the worst team in the league. That's their 1 win since the break. Otherwise, they lost 3-0 to Vegas, 3-1 to LAT, a team that had been 3-0'd back-to-back versus Toronto and FaZe. And then this past week, they lost 3-1 to Carolina, like we just mentioned. So 1-3 since the break. Granted, against 3 teams that certainly have a chance at winning this tournament. I don't want to shortchange them, but this is also the two-time defending world champions, who have we both predicted before the season that they had the MVP of the league on this team in Mercules, and yet they're 1-3 over the last 3 weeks. So that definitely concerns me. Meanwhile, we have the Riyadh Falcons, who began the season losing 3-0 to Optic. The very first match of the 2026 CDL season was a 3-0 sweep for Optic versus the Riyadh Falcons. Falcons then lost 3-1 later in the week to LAT. Since then, they have won 5 straight. They are tied with Carolina for the longest active win streak in the league. The Falcons beat Carolina 3-0, beat Boston 3-1, beat Minnesota 3-2, beat Paris 3-1, and this past week beat C9 3-2. I mentioned on the last show that I think there's not criticism necessarily, but you could definitely be skeptical of the Falcons because their schedule has not been the hardest. Like, they've played a lot of top teams. They played Paris and LAT and Optic, but they lost 2 of those matches. Otherwise, they played C9, who finished 1-6. They did beat Paris, which is undoubtedly their best win of the season. They played Minnesota, who have lost 3 or 4 game 5s, but otherwise is a strong team. I don't want to take anything away from them. They played Boston, who is very hit or miss, 3-4 team, very middle to lower part of the pack, pretty much throughout their existence of this roster or any kind of iteration of this roster. And then they beat Carolina before they made the roster change. So I don't know how that match would go right now. That's not why we do things or how we do things. But I think it is fair to note what the Falcons have been able to do, and necessarily, maybe not against the best competition. That being said, like, they definitely have a shit ton more momentum than Optic does. Optic really can't do anything at this point. I'm kind of stuck because my rule is to pick the better team typically. I know I've gone against that in this very episode, but I think typically I would like to go with the Optic team, where Mercules probably the best player in the world. The one of the best collection of players that you'll find in the CDL and Optic, versus Riyadh, which has a great collection of players by itself, but also we've seen the lower parts of this team. And I think that the ceiling is not nearly as high for this team. The floor is lower than Optic, and yet they're in a completely different position. So what do you think about this matchup between Optic and the Falcons?
Yeah, I think the key for me here is the Falcons win over Gentlemates. I think if Falcons lost that match to Gentlemates, I am most likely picking Optic here to win without even really second guessing it. Because my whole thing with Falcons this year so far has been they played really well against the teams they in theory should have beat, and then they struggled early on against those teams, the quote unquote top teams. Then they get that win over Gentlemates, and that kind of breaks the mold of how I was looking at this team and their season to date. Um, so I think that win over Gentlemates for Falcons plus Optic's recent struggles, I'm going with the Falcons revenge match here. Pred getting hype, playing against his old team, playing against the Green Wall in home territory. Um, I can definitely see the case for Optic to take this one. They've beaten Falcons already early this season. Granted, Mercules did drop a 1.8 KD in that series. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I am not expecting Mercules to have another 1.8 in this series. If he does, I guess I wouldn't be surprised because he technically has done it before. But I think that would be pretty nuts, and that would be a big middle finger to all of the people, including us, over the last couple of weeks who have been like questioning Optic or anything. That'd be one way to shut us up, is just Mercury's legacy saving series again comes out, drops to 2.0, double birds everybody in the crowd. That'd be hilarious. Um, but yeah, I mean, if you look at it from like a map or maps and I don't know why I just struggled so much with that. A mode breakdown so far this season for both teams, and keeping in mind that Optic were they 3-0'd Falcons, so these records are all like +1 win for Optic in each mode and -1 loss for Falcons in each mode. Falcons are 5-7 in hardpoint, 6-3 in search, and 5-2 in overload. So that means they're 5-1 in overload outside of that first match of the season, 6-2 in S&D outside of that first match of the season, and then 5-6 in hardpoint. That's obviously not good, but it's the S&D and overload that sticks out to me from a map and modes standpoint. For Optic, it's really they're 6-6 in hardpoint, so they're 5-6 in hardpoint without the Falcons match, 5-3 in search, which is 4-3 without the Falcons win, and then 3-4 in overload, which means they're 2-4 in overload without that win over Falcons. So there's nothing really from a mode standpoint that jumps out to me about Optic, whereas Falcons, and you can go talk about the strength of schedule and that, but it is, I don't want to completely discredit Optic for coming out and taking care of business in the first match of the season, but it is not, it doesn't feel like a very drastic leap for me to say that these teams are at least slightly different than the teams that played each other back at the start of December.
Yeah, I don't know how much you can actually even look at that first match or any of those
Yeah.
pre-break matches, because we've seen such a difference in a lot of these teams between, December 15th and January 15th. I don't know how much you can take of any of those matches. I can't pick against Optic because in this scenario, if this was Optic versus FaZe, Optic versus Paris, it's a much different conversation. I have a hard time believing that Optic will lose this match to the Falcons. Even if that is like, I don't even know, maybe Optic is like an underdog or whatever. I don't keep up with like betting odds or whatever, but I think there's a realistic chance that they are the underdog here because of how poorly they have played over the past few weeks. But I'm gonna pick Optic. I have just I guess a feeling. It doesn't really have any logic. It's just I know what this team is capable of. I
Yeah.
think that this lull that they go through every single year, like of pretty much their entire existence as an organization, is very odd. I don't know. Maybe they do something at New Year's where people like take their brains out, and then it takes, I don't know, like a few months to kind of get reacclimated to the world. But it doesn't make sense. The Falcons are a much better team at this point in the season than I thought they would be. I've been very clear that I'm not an Exnid believer, but he has been playing very, very well, and this team has looked much better since that first week when I think we were both like, well, yeah, like that's what you get. This is this is what you get when you have Exnid on this team, and Kismet is like playing out of role, and it just seems like things aren't what they should be. And now they tied for first in the Major 1 qualifiers, and Optics coming into this match ice cold. So everything logically points to a Falcons win, and yet I'm not a very logical person apparently, and I'm going to go with Optic here. But like obviously I can definitely see it going the other way, and these online results kind of being a harbinger of like what's coming for Optic.
I honestly think Optic is the logical choice here just because we've seen them beat Falcons already this season. Granted, first match of the year. Also, we know how the Green Wall comes out and supports their favorite team on land. This being the quote unquote Optic event, like it's the crowd's gonna be electric, and that whether you how much you buy into that being a true factor or not, it is a factor at least to some extent, in my opinion. Um, I just think you know it's regardless of who you actually pick to win this match, the fact that within less than 2 months, this went from Optic is winning this match easily and we don't talk about it for more than 5 seconds to we're even having to debate it is kind of just crazy to think about in terms of like how the season started and where both these teams were literally less than 2 months ago.
And like you said, that Paris match holds a lot of weight with both of us because it
Yep.
would be very easy to pick Optic if
Yeah.
Falcons just were beating kind of the lower tier,
Yep.
like bottom five teams, but beating Paris, who are the number one seed technically in this tournament and definitely a top three team. That's like pretty impressive, even though like that first map and a half of that series was like so dominant toward Paris that like that also sticks with me. There are just some things that like you just remember when you talk about these matches. But I also just want to see Falcons park the bus and overload against Optic against like in
Oh my
enemy
God. I
territory.
wasn't even thinking about that.
I want to see a fan get so mad they like go up on the stage and try to throw hands with Celium about parking the bus. I think it would be incredible. Like I know people say like it's not entertaining. That specific instance would be incredibly entertaining just to see the drama and like I'd be on Twitter like just refreshing my feed every 5 seconds.
One thing I want to bring up in terms of getting a little analytical here, just looking at the map picks on Breaking
Mm-hmm.
Point. Obviously, shout out Breaking Point. I thought I've seen Falcons play Blackheart a little bit more recently, but I guess it's just one instance of them playing Blackheart because they're only 1-0 on the map. Um, so I thought that might be something that could be a factor here because obviously Blackheart wasn't available when Falcons and Optic played first match of the season. Blackheart is seemingly like I don't want to say it's an auto veto for Optic because they have three maps that they vetoed 4 times this year: Colossus, Den, and Blackheart. But they haven't picked Blackheart once. Optic is 0 picks and 4 vetoes on Blackheart. Uh, 3 picks of Den and 4 vetoes of Den, and then 2 picks of Colossus and 4 vetoes of Colossus. The maps they're picking are Exposure, which they've picked it 5 times and they vetoed it once, and then Scar they've picked it 4 times and they vetoed it once. They have a 3-1 record on Exposure Hardpoint, and seemingly Falcons have picked Exposure Hardpoint 5 times. They haven't vetoed it a single time this year, but they're 0-3 on Exposure Hardpoint. So that could be a little wrinkle here in this matchup if Falcons decide to potentially veto it. They seemingly are vetoing Scar. They vetoed Scar Hardpoint 5 times and Den Hardpoint 5 times. They're 0-2 on Den Hardpoint and 1-1 on Scar Hardpoint. Um, but Optic have picked Scar 4 times and they're 1-3 on Scar record wise. So I think that'll be something that I look for in this series here is whether or not Exposure Hardpoint is picked, because seemingly that would favor Optic. And if Exposure has to be vetoed by Falcons, then we could see Scar just auto picked by either team, and then that is, even though we've seen Optic pick it a little bit, uh, if Falcons can't veto Exposure and Scar, and they have I don't know, it just from a hard point standpoint, it looks a little weird in terms of what might happen here in the vetoes, because it seems like Optic might just veto Blackheart, but that could be something. Again, Blackheart wasn't available to be played the first time these teams faced off, and I thought maybe that could be a little bit of a wrinkle here, but it doesn't seem like it'll get through. But something to keep an eye on there in terms of this matchup in particular is whether or not Exposure is in the map pool.
Yeah, and I think like you said, if Optic is not particularly good on Scar just in general, like they haven't been able to win that map very regularly, like that's probably something that teams won't necessarily want to veto. They'll just let it go and probably just veto Exposure just to kind of see them on it. And then like I think it's interesting that you say like Optic like 3 of their most vetoed maps, and one of them is Blackheart. When Blackheart, like you said, was not in the rotation, so they couldn't have vetoed it to start this season. So I
Yeah.
think that's pretty interesting. So I mean, I would imagine Scar will be in this series as a result. Like, unless Optic has been saving up some Blackheart strats for the LAN, which can happen. Some teams like to
Yeah.
pull it off.
Yep.
I feel like pulling it out against Falcons round 1 is a little weird, but they might need all the help they can get to just get a win and kind of stop the little train that they've been on, which I think is interesting because the last time Optic hosted a major, they were also going in with a losing streak, if I'm not mistaken, because wasn't that the Skies major? Um, was that not?
Was it?
Or no, was that Toronto?
No, 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 no. I think you're right because they did the ring ceremony with
Yeah.
Kenny, and Kenny wasn't even on the team.
Yeah. So interesting. I don't know
Oh,
if that has anything to do with it.
I haven't checked Twitter. Is there a ring ceremony before this first match?
Well, they haven't said anything about it, but
Oh, that could be
maybe
a massive momentum shifter. If Mercules gets that first ring, he might drop a 2.7 on Falcons in this series.
I don't know. But yeah, we'll see what happens here between Falcons and Optic, and then the final match on Thursday in the winners bracket is FaZe versus G2 Minnesota. Another one of these matches. You know, we have seen a match between all 8 of these teams, and like these 4 matches, we've seen them pretty recently, honestly, as well. FaZe versus G2 went to G2 the last time that they played, which was shocking because G2 to that point had been floundering. They had lost a bunch of game 5s. They hadn't been able to build any type of momentum. Whereas FaZe, we were kind of saying this is the best team. They have proven that I guess the preseason where we weren't as high on them and we were thinking like, okay, maybe they're the 4th best team in the CDL or whatever, was completely underrating them. And then of course they go into this match and FaZe wins map 1 and then they lose 3 straight maps. And G2 wins, and now G2 is kind of on a win streak and feeling, I would assume, pretty good about themselves because Minnesota, after beating FaZe, then 3-0 Toronto this past weekend, it didn't necessarily help them too much in terms of climbing the seedings because they only got as high as 7th, but they could have been in the losers bracket if they didn't win one of those 2 matches, which is pretty impressive. I'm still gonna go with FaZe. Like that's like, again, the recent result does not necessarily mean that I'm gonna pick them. The thing that you could say if you're a FaZe optimist and you think that FaZe is gonna win is that the 2 maps that Minnesota won, the Raid S&D and the Den Overload, were about as close as you could get without FaZe winning. It went to round 11 and G2 won, and then Den Overload went to overtime and G2 won 2-1. Obviously, a flip of those maps is a sweep for FaZe. You can say that about literally every map in Call of Duty history, basically, but I don't think it can be overlooked that this was an incredibly close series that just ended up going to 4 maps, and G2 won this. So I will go with FaZe, but certainly can see Minnesota, who I think everybody underrated going into that match because of how badly the game 5s went for them. I certainly can see them winning this. So who do you have between FaZe and G2?
Yeah, I'm going with phase 2, and I'll even take it a step further in terms of what you were just breaking down with the maps 2 and 3. Simp dropping a breadstick in 11 rounds of S&D in map 2. We both I don't think you do, and I know I don't, but we're not betting men, especially betting on the CDL. But I would bet a substantial amount of money if I did on Simp to drop more than 1 kill in this map 2 S&D against G2. The first time they play on LAN here. Like I think that can't be ignored. And again, similar going back to the craze thing, like I'm not gonna put all the blame on one guy for how a round 11 search goes or how, in the craze situation it was different for the maps played. But regardless, here I'm not going to put all the blame on Simp for that map too.
Mm-hmm.
You obviously can put part of the blame on a guy who goes 1-9, but they're obviously, I'm sure if we went back and broke down some of the rounds up there were likely some scenarios where something could have went a different way, and then we're talking about FaZe winning that map, and like you said, potentially a 3-0 for FaZe. I just think this G2 team had been burned by Minnesota a lot in the last couple years, and I just think an element to this FaZe team right now is 0-4 and Abuza gotta be hungry to get back to a finals and show people that they have what it takes to actually hoist the trophy after a year where they got to multiple finals and just couldn't actually uh you know get the job done there. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm most forward to or most looking forward to with this FaZe team on land here is that segment of the duo. Um Trying to get their first championship and doing it for FaZe, doing it potentially in Optic territory. Like there's a lot of cool narratives from that perspective. And then there's the simp aspect of it as well. Obviously, Draza has found success on other teams with multiple different sets of teammates, but really, this is the first LAN event of Simp's career. I mean, not counting like those New Jersey local tournaments and whatnot, but it's the first LAN event he's playing without a BZ. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, not the first he's playing without, but the first without Celium in a very long time since the United days. So, um, it's we talked about it just a day ago. Like Simp leading the qualifiers in KD so far this year, he's looking like an MVP form. And obviously, when he goes 1-9 in a search against G2, that's not helping his KD or not the MVP
Mm-hmm.
Simp you expect. So if MVP Simp shows up at this event, shows up in this first round, I expect FaZe to take care of business. I think that's also a cool narrative. Simp trying to win his first trophy without a BZ and his first tournament without a BZ. Like that's a cool way of looking at it. If we get, FaZe versus LAT in the finals, I don't know. Just FaZe versus LAT at any point in this tournament, like Simp versus BZ. Obviously, there's the Draza and Scrap side to it as well, but like that's just a cool matchup to see. Jumping the gun a little bit with that one, but yeah, I'm looking for FaZe to take this win. And I think one of the the biggest things that we can't ignore, I kind of teased it a little bit last episode, and I saved it for this one to make sure it was in our prediction or preview episode. Is just I've said it multiple times. It feels like over the last couple of weeks, this whole Kremp losses thing with G2 feels like it started as a meme, but it is very real. G2 are 5-1 on Colossus Hardpoint, and teams are still playing it against them. They, I said it before we went live. G2 have picked Colossus Hardpoint 6 times. They vetoed it once. I would have to go back and look at the vetoes to see who that was against or why it was vetoed. But it feels like it's been in every series, so maybe that was like a first match of the year thing. That's just a total guess on my part. But for FaZe have picked Colossus 4 times and they've only vetoed it twice. Where it seems like they vetoed Scar 5 times. So that might be like a auto veto for Scar Hardpoint for FaZe, but they're 1-0 on it. So I think the fact that FaZe, again, we talked about it at the time of this previous matchup, FaZe have been known to, in qualifiers, be a little bit more willing to test out some maps and stuff. Usually that happens later in the season, so I'm not how sure I am about that being the case this last time these teams played. But if Colossus Hardpoint is in this match, I will absolutely lose my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Any team, regardless of whether it's in the winners bracket or the losers bracket, any team that plays G2 against Colossus or plays Colossus against G2 at this major seemingly just deserves to I don't want to say deserve to lose the match, but it feels like it's at the point where if you pick to not veto, I don't want to say pick Colossus. If you choose to not veto Colossus against G2, you're effectively going into the match before you even shot your gun once with a map loss, because that's how good G2 have actually been at the map. And it's even like the Kremp losses thing. Like, yeah, Kremp had one really good map on it, but it's like I don't remember what, I think it was the Toronto map I mentioned last week in the notes. Like Mamba had a 10 spree to end it. There was another instance where even Skies was playing well in the respawn and had good numbers there. Estriel had a strong performance there. So it's not always been Kremp, even though there's the Kremp losses mean to it. It's just G2 have been very, very good at this map. And unless these teams are unless there's something that I'm totally missing about these other teams just wanting to seemingly ego chow G2 on this map, I can't fathom why this map keeps getting through in the matchups against G2. And if it's a one thing about teams willing to do it online, then that is what it is. But if I see G2 in meaningful matches, like if it happens in the losers bracket, like let's say G2 lose this series to FaZe and losers bracket round one, they play Colossus against whoever they drop down and play, that is what it is, because it's losers bracket round one. But I feel like outside of losers bracket round one, if Colossus is in any series for G2, it feels like that other team in the vetoes is just trolling. I don't know how else to break it down.
I think I wonder if a part of it is the Blackheart ban that happened, where it shrank the hardpoint map pool, and then when Blackheart came back in, teams didn't feel comfortable. Maybe they hadn't been practicing it very much when it came in, so they just started, this is an automatic veto. We have to auto veto Blackheart because we don't know how to play it. We don't feel good about playing it against other teams. So then it shrinks it down. And when you auto veto Blackheart and you play Minnesota, Minnesota's like, all right, we will play Colossus then. And we will make sure that we get this map that we're very good on. I think it's, it's good to say that FaZe, their most played hardpoint map is Exposure. They're 2-2 on Exposure. They haven't played any other hardpoint map more than twice. It should be noted, though, that Colossus, they played twice. Den, they've also played twice. They're 1-1 on Colossus, 0-2 on Den. Then they're 1-0 on Blackheart and 1-0 on Scar. Scar is by far, like, if they do have an auto veto, it is Scar hardpoint. So again, like if they are going to veto Scar hardpoint, that leaves open Colossus for Minnesota to kind of like, all right, like we don't want, like we're good with not playing Scar as well. And then that introduces a lot of, it just puts like that one map heavily in favor of Minnesota at this point in the season, which it's a 5-game series. If you're not giving a map, because I think FaZe probably and a lot of these other teams could beat Minnesota on Colossus, but if you're giving them a favorable map pick and hard point, whether it be 1 or 4, that just changes the dynamics of this series, where it feels like Minnesota does have the advantage. And maybe it's a reason that they've been able to go to so many game 5s. I don't necessarily think that they're as talented as some of these other teams, but they've been able to win some matches, definitely push really good teams, including Optic in early part of the season, to a game 5. So, I think it's interesting. And I think that's what makes the map vetoes very intriguing to watch across all of these series this coming weekend, is just seeing what teams are kind of prioritizing and how much Blackheart actually gets vetoed, because that could be real interesting. Is like, our team's still not comfortable on this map and they don't feel like they should play it, which I think just hamstrings you. Like you should, like it's been in there for a bit now. Like you should be, if you don't feel comfortable on that map, you should be really practicing it going into the first major, at least to feel like you have some level of competency when you actually get to land. And I would also say that Colossus is the most played hardpoint of the CDL this season. According to COD Gamepedia, where they have a breakdown, Colossus has been played 18 times versus Den and Exposure both 16 and Scar 15. And then Blackheart obviously only has 6 compared to that. But I just thought that was an interesting stat. It does show that maybe some teams feel just a little more comfortable on Colossus, but regardless of how comfortable you are, sometimes it is in your best interest to just ban it and make sure that you don't play the other team's best pick and their best map. I mean, that's happened throughout esports history. Like if League of Legends and CS:GO, like it's always happened where it's like, yeah, we feel really good on that map, but that other team is just like that's their comfort pick. And I mentioned it to you in the pre-show, but Octane tweeted out, he's like, how long are teams going to let
Yeah.
Minnesota get their comfort picks? And we'll see if that changes at all in this series. FaZe is, a championship operation. We've always seen that with RJ and Crowder. They have won multiple majors. They've won championships together. They've been together for a really, really long time now. So you would hope that they see that and they kind of take note of it. But, I guess we'll have to wait and see to figure out what teams actually believe about G2 and whether they're worth, I guess, the respect of banning their comfort hardpoint pick. But yeah, that does it for the winners bracket. That we have 4 winners bracket matches. Those will all be on Thursday, and then the losers bracket will begin on Friday. The 4 teams that finished in the bottom 4 of the qualifiers, they will automatically begin in the losers bracket here. Miami, Vancouver, Boston, and C9 New York. Those teams begin the losers bracket. So Miami, they are at the top of the losers bracket, so they will play the loser of Paris versus Toronto. You said on the last episode, I think it would be incredibly interesting, but if Toronto does lose to Paris like we predicted, then they would drop down to play Miami. We saw the Real controversy over the offseason, whether he verbally agreed to the deal and then he left Miami for Toronto. I think that would be really, really interesting. Who do you, because we both picked Paris here, who do you think would come out on top in a Miami versus Toronto series?
I have to go with Toronto, but this is a match we saw to kick off the year back on December 6th. And it went to a game 5 despite everything going on with Trakes and lack of practice and all that. Um, this was the series where like Toronto won map 1 250 to 85 and they got out to like 100-0 lead or something absolutely absurd, and that's when we were talking about the whole Trakes thing and seemingly Miami not being up in terms of practice or having some issues because of the visa stuff, yada yada. And I think Toronto won the the overload 8-0. Miami won map 2 search 6-5. The hard point, the other map they won was Den, and they won 250 to 199, so that was a close map too. But then Toronto wins game 5 6-3. So really it was 2 blowout respawn wins for Toronto and then a game 5 search in a team's first match together. So really, if Toronto lose to Gentlemates and they have like 3 or 4 losses in a row heading into that Miami match, Miami being more practiced than the last time they faced off against this Toronto team, I could see a way that Miami gets the win. I would still have to pick Toronto just because I been vocal about my belief in this Toronto squad, and just the fact that like it's even possible Toronto could get top 12 at the first major of the year again. That's just something like ludicrous that I wouldn't have even thought of as a possibility. So I don't think it'd even be a stretch to say like Toronto, if that actually happened, like we're looking at a Toronto roster change for a team that doesn't make a ton of in-season roster changes unless it's, Beans having visa issues and then Mercules just falls into their lap and then they fumble the bag and let him go to Optic. But that's not here or there anymore. So, yeah, I think I'd go with Toronto, but I would be very hesitant. And again, the fact that it was a 3-2 match when the everything else was seemingly in Toronto's favor heading into that matchup, the fact that it would be maybe possibly a little bit more favored for Miami if Toronto's coming off multiple losses in a row, that is got to be a scary notion.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at the losers bracket. I think it's pretty clear that of the 4 loser bracket teams, that Miami has the best chance to make a run. They would probably be the best candidate for it. I don't see Vancouver making a run if they have to play the loser of Carolina, LAT. Boston would play Minnesota or Vegas. I could see Boston winning that, especially if they play Minnesota. I don't think they necessarily would. And then C9, I mean, they would probably give whoever drops down a really tough match, but I don't know if they could actually make a run. So I think the default would be Miami. But this top part of the losers bracket is that feels like whoever drops down there is going to make the run through the losers.
Oh, I was gonna say I think the bottom half of the losers bracket is where like somebody can get. I don't want to say the bottom half of the losers bracket just feels much less threatening than the top half.
Okay.
Um, because in my eyes, that Carolina versus Thieves matchup, one of those teams has to lose, and then they're in that top part there. They play against Vancouver, so that something would have to go drastically wrong for regardless Carolina or LAT to lose to Vancouver at this
Yeah,
point.
for sure.
So it feels like whoever loses that matchup has a really good shot to move on, regardless of who they would play, Miami, and then the loser of Gentlemates, Toronto. In a world where Toronto beats Gentlemates, and then like we potentially have Gentlemates versus Thieves or Gentlemates versus Carolina for top 8, that'd be kind of crazy with the way things have been going on lately. So that's what I feel like that is much more of a juggernaut part of the losers bracket versus again, this is assuming that FaZe don't lose to G2.
Yeah.
If FaZe lose, that kind of throws out the bottom part of the window. But I mean, I could see a world where if G2 and Falcons both lose, then I don't know which of those teams, G2, Boston Falcons, or Cloud9 goes on, but it feels like the route is easy for not easy, but easier for any of those teams to go on a bit of a run. If Optic or FaZe drop down to that losers bracket, it's like I really expect one of them to just, steamroll through that bottom part of the losers bracket. But um, I don't know. I do think for me, based on what we're expecting to happen in the winners bracket, I would go Boston as the team
Mm.
uh, that could potentially win more than one losers bracket match, and that's going with the assumption G2 lose the phase and then drop down, and then Boston has a Boston series where nobody's expecting them to win and they come out and beat G2, and then they potentially play like Falcons or you know, I guess that's basing it on Optic beating Falcons there, which isn't what I picked, so that's a little contradictory, but um I think the Miami versus Toronto thing, if I'm picking one match that is potentially most likely for a loser bracket team to win, I would go there and say Miami, just because I think highly of Miami as an S&D team from last year. S&D is crucial on LAN, and that could be something Miami has going for them there. But outside of that, I mean, I'm basically writing off Vancouver, Cloud9, and then Boston is like I'm never picking Boston, but like, Boston is a bit fluky in terms of you pick them and then they don't show up, or you don't pick them and then they upset LAT in winners bracket round one. So, more or less going here with the strength of the top of the bracket versus the strength of the lower bracket. I think maybe Boston could do something a little unprecedented there, but it's again very reliant on which teams drop down and whatnot. But I do think that I'm circling it, and it doesn't mean anything for the viewers. But that second round matchup, uh, losers bracket round 2 on the top part of the losers bracket, that is the matchup I'm gonna have my eyes on, because the possibilities there are just, we could even if it's like chalk, and let's say like you picked Gentlemates in Carolina, and then Toronto and LAT drop down, and then it's Toronto versus LAT in that round. We saw Toronto beat LAT just a couple of weeks ago, and you could argue different teams and all that now, but like I don't know who I would pick in that matchup this time around, just based on what we've seen from Toronto and LAT recently. I think that is the matchup, outside of potentially having uh, FaZe versus Optic in winner bracket round 2, or Gentlemates versus Thieves in winners bracket round 2. I think that losers bracket round 2 just has a lot of interesting possibilities, and I'm really excited to see what that looks like in the end.
Yeah, we could have a ton of intriguing matchups in round 2, both in the winners bracket and losers bracket. Like you said, in the losers bracket, it could be Toronto versus LAT. Even Toronto versus Carolina would be really interesting just based on how Carolina is played. In the lower part of the losers bracket, you could have an Optic versus Minnesota match, or even a Falcons versus Minnesota. I mean, obviously, if FaZe drops down, like all bets are off. Like that losers bracket becomes a bloodbath because I think FaZe will really mess some teams up in the losers bracket. But in the winners bracket, you're guaranteed to have some combination of Paris, Toronto, Carolina, LAT playing each other. A Paris versus Thieves match sounds really good. I'd like to see if it's any different than what we saw before the break. Carolina versus Paris would be like, if Carolina is able to beat LAT and Paris beats Toronto, Paris versus Carolina is really, really interesting because I need to see if Carolina can just keep beating the top teams or what we think are the top teams. And then in the other part, like the obvious one is FaZe versus Optic. If both teams win, they play each other in the winter semis. FaZe versus Falcons, it would obviously be Celium versus his old team, and Cell versus Simp. I think obviously there's a ton there, and I think that's what makes this major just very interesting, is just this unpredictability. Like we have been able to pick chalk in a lot of the majors in years past because it's been like a very clear, like there's a top 4 and then there's like there's a 2 or 3 teams in the middle that could shake some things up, but they're not nearly as good as the top 4. And then you have the rest of the teams that are just like bottom of the barrel. They have nothing going for them. Really, right now, there's only one team here where I'm like, I just don't know if they could beat any single team, and that's Vancouver. Like, that's the only one. And granted, they did beat Boston. So, like, maybe there is something there. Like, if they get LAT coming off of a loss to Carolina, LAT just, like, is like, whatever. Like, we're going to make a roster change after this tournament. Like, we're so tilted from this match, and Vancouver's able to win. But, like, they're the only team out of the 12 where I don't feel like there's a real clear path to them even winning one match here. C9, there's a real clear path. Win a game 5. That's their path. Boston, they have a clear path to upsetting teams any day of the week. Miami, I think the ceiling is very high for them. If things click together, which we have seen in the past before, teams that underperform online, they get to land and things just start to come together for them, and they could they very easily could make a run if they play, say, Toronto, and then even if they play like LAT in round 2. Those are 2 teams that are very vulnerable, very flawed, and could be beaten by a Miami team that is able. We saw it last year. Miami was able to beat LAT multiple times on land, and really make a run at some of these majors. So a lot of unpredictability just in general around this major. But let's get down to our actual predictions. Who do you think is going to win the first major of the CDL season?
Oh boy. I had a whole thing planned based on who you picked and me going first.
I will pick first then. I could see pretty much like the top. I don't think that Toronto will win. I feel fairly confident about that. I don't think that the Falcons will win. I feel not nearly as confident, but I feel semi-confident about that. So I really think that any of the other 6 teams could win this major, which is by far the most teams that I really believe in going into any major, I think, that we've ever done on this show. I will go with the Paris Gentlemates as my team. I think that FaZe probably has the easier path, if I have to be honest, because if Optic is the Optic that we've seen over these past few weeks, they definitely have, I think, an easier path because Minnesota has shown that they are not like the strongest team, even though I think they're very good. Falcons. We've seen them be able to be beat by some of these top teams, and I think FaZe would have their number. Optic, if they play as they have the last few weeks, like there's no chance that they're winning the major. So FaZe probably has the clearer path to a championship, but I think if Paris is able to get a little bit of momentum by beating Toronto again and then beat Carolina, LAT, whichever comes out, I think that will kind of spur them on. I've been a foremost and ardent Paris believer this entire preseason and offseason and into the season, even though they haven't been great as of late. But I will go with Paris. It is definitely one of the least confident picks that I've ever had since we've done this show.
So I was thinking there was a strong likelihood you were going to pick Carolina. And if you picked Carolina, I didn't want to pick Carolina. But I also didn't really want to pick Carolina.
Yeah.
So I was hoping you picked Carolina. But now I don't know if I want to do this because we've had this whole thing about Carolina being best team in the world, and then neither of us pick them to win the event. That seems kind of trolly.
I feel like we've done that so many times, though. It's just like I don't believe in them 100%.
So I am going to go with Old Reliable. And in the least shocking pick in Ego Chall history, I am picking not Atlanta FaZe, but FaZe to win Major 1.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Like if you go back, and I'm sure somebody could do this, where they just go back and look at who we picked for every major that we predicted, like I'd say upwards of 90% have been FaZe picks. Granted, I think we started during the Cold War season, or so like that was like right in the middle of FaZe dominance, where they won almost every single major and they were definitively the best team. And that just kind of never wore off I think for good reason, even though they weren't always winning them. But yeah, I think they have like I said, they have a clear path. Like Falcons and Optic are two, I don't want to say flawed teams again, because like that is really like, I guess, overstating some of the issues with Falcons in particular. But I think we both think like we're not entirely sure of Falcons' status as like a championship team, just as we weren't when the season started. Like we said, like they're definitely on the outside looking in when you talk about like Paris, Optic, FaZe, LAT. Like they're not in that group, and maybe even Toronto. And they showed that in those first two matches. Granted, they've gone this 5-match win streak. They've been able to beat Paris. But I think there are still some obvious questions that we have about them. Minnesota, there are a ton of questions. Optic, there are a ton of questions. So if you think about that, they're able to get through the winner semis, and then they play probably Paris or Carolina LAT in the winners finals. And FaZe has just been able to do this. Like you just said it when we were talking about FaZe's match. They have half this team went to like a ton of grand finals last year, and they have a ton of LAN experience, especially for how little CDL experience they have in relation to that. And then you add in Simp and Draza, former world champions. They've done the long runs through majors and champs and EWC before. So like, I think it makes a ton of sense to pick FaZe. I just have like the Paris thing where I think, at their best, I think they could be the best team. We just haven't seen them at their best, I think, over these last few weeks. And the same could be said about FaZe too, because they lost to Minnesota. So it's again very difficult to predict, almost impossible to feel confident about any of these picks going into the major. And we saw last year many times that there was an 8-seed curse where whoever was the number 1 seed, they felt really good going into that match, and then they would lose winners round 1 and kind of have to start all over in the losers bracket. For my prediction's sake, I hope that's not the case with Paris this year. I think it would make it very interesting if Paris did have to go through the losers bracket, and then that really opens up that top portion of the winners bracket. As far as Carolina goes, I'm a believer that they can. I think they can win. They were not one of those two teams that I said that I don't think that they could win this event. So they're definitely in that. But I'm also like, please prove it to me that you can beat all these teams in quick succession and win this tournament. I just can't pick them at this point, knowing that they really haven't done this before. Like this would be probably the most improbable major win, maybe other than LAG in 2022, which had a lot of other stuff going around it. Like that was pretty unexpected, but I can't think of another team that just came out of nowhere to win a major like this in any other point in CDL history. Maybe somebody else can, but it feels like this would be pretty incredible. Like there's no superstar player that we know of. Like there isn't anybody on this team where it's like they're a former world champion, a former MVP, like nothing. Like there's nothing on this team that would make you believe it, which would be pretty incredible for storyline's sake. So if you're picking FaZe, who's the tournament MVP?
Simp. That feels like cop out, but
I mean,
goes.
you're going with Simp. I'm going with Dan Ghosty.
Yeah,
I think
love
the
it.
narrative would be very, very strong for my boy Dan, especially if he plays LAT in winter semis and he beats LAT. Oh man, like he's he's king of the world at that point. So yeah, if they win, I think it'll be Dan. If FaZe wins, I think it'll be Simp. We'll see what actually happens though.
We usually try and do it. We kind of did it a little piecemeal, but losers bracket run. I think since both of us picked uh Falcons or no, you picked Optic, so scratch that. But with me picking Optic to lose to Falcons, I do think Optic would be in a pretty good position to go on a losers bracket run. Just like I said, the combination of that bottom part of the losers bracket, I could see Optic dropping down and pretty easily beating Cloud9, and then they would play presumably against G2 or Boston, and I would be pretty confident against Optic against either of those teams. But again, I guess recent performance does murky that a little bit. But just again, going off the talent and the team on paper, I do think Optic would probably have the best chance to win two losers bracket matches at least, and that also coincides with me thinking that top half of the bracket in losers bracket is a little more challenging, just because, like I said, even if Carolina or Thieves they do beat Surge, they have a tougher losers bracket round two matchup seemingly than Optic would if they're playing G2 or Boston. Even though G2 has looked pretty good lately, I think probably slightly more highly of Toronto and Miami like long term. So that's where my head's at there for losers bracket potential.
Yeah, I think it's LAT because if I pick Carolina, LAT drops down. They would
Yeah.
play Vancouver. Then they'd play what I'm predicting is the winner of Miami and Toronto. I think they could win that. And then even in the next round, they would play probably like Optic or Falcons in the losers quarters. And I think LAT could. I mean, LAT did beat both of those teams in the qualifiers, granted at different points of the season. But yeah, so I think it's LAT, even though I don't feel good about them necessarily. But the losers bracket is really open, like it's literally wide open for
Yeah.
any of the teams that drop down. I don't see any of those four teams that are already there making a run. I think it's
Yeah.
Miami that has the best chance, but like you said, Boston definitely could win a few matches as well. I just don't feel very good about any of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Agreed.
Anything else that we're missing from the equation? We're about an hour and a half in to this preview. It starts on Thursday, so unlike qualifiers that start on Friday, tune in on Thursday afternoon to watch the first major. Anything else that I'm missing?
I don't think so. I think this is actually, for once, it's a pretty solid mix. I feel of us, like it feels like we're talking through it, and there is some chalk, but it also feels like there are some matches here that we're seeing could go either way, and that could be again part of the formula with Black Ops 7 this year. That could be just more of like a coin flipping nature to some of these matchups, or it's a sign of really just unpredictability heading into the first event of the year, and I'm leaning toward that being the case, and it just making me even more excited for this tournament.
Yeah, so Thursday, January 29th, I think it starts at 1:30 Eastern, because it's a Central Time tournament. And it starts off with Paris versus Toronto. So if you're looking, so Paris versus Toronto starts off, then about 3 o'clock, LAT versus Carolina. About 4:30, Optic versus Falcons, and then the final match of the day will be about 6 o'clock, FaZe versus Minnesota, and then it'll pick up with the losers bracket on Friday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern, and it'll be Vancouver's losers bracket match. So it'll be Carolina and or LAT versus Vancouver, which will be very interesting match, I'm sure. And then go through Sunday, and then we will be back hopefully on Sunday evening to talk about the matches, to break all the matches, not all the matches. I don't know how much we'll necessarily talk about that Vancouver versus Carolina LAT match, depending on the result, I guess. But we'll talk about a lot of the matches. We'll talk about the teams, and whether our expectations were wildly off, and our predictions were very incorrect, which happens from time to time. Some of these majors are very hard to predict. So we'll be back to talk about everything on Sunday evening, most likely. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. Please make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We were at 276 subscribers when I checked last night when I uploaded the video. You can also watch the streams live on both YouTube and Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. Please follow the Twitch. You can also tune in to Bink streams, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. You can follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcaster is at Ego Chall Podcast. And again, I think it'll be Sunday night that we're back. Monday morning for the people who tune in through the podcasts. But yeah, that about does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, let's get out of here. A lot of yapping from us over the last 2 days. Very rare you get back-to-back Ego Child podcasts. So, hope you guys enjoyed. Had a blast breaking it all down with you per wrestling, and we do have just under 46, 47-ish hours until the major starts from live. So once these videos are up and whatnot, if you guys have any predictions or whatnot, leave them in the comments on the YouTube video. I'll be keeping an eye on it, and maybe we can have a little back and forth talk on any thoughts heading into the tournament and whatnot. But yeah, like Preston said, we will be back very soon, most likely Sunday and or Monday. Not and, but or Monday. And can't wait to break everything that happens over this tournament. We'll be able to talk about Carolina's first major victory that neither of us ended up picking. But yeah, really excited. I hope you guys had enjoyed this show, because I had a blast doing it. And yeah, can't wait to break it all down for you guys in a couple days. We will see you on the next one. Have a good one, and remember to send the chow.